So, hello everybody from a slightly cloudy afternoon in Cambridge in the UK. Welcome to today's webinar on preparing for success in Cambridge English qualifications with our information for candidate booklets. The new booklets are for B2 First, B2 First for Schools, C1 Advanced and C2 Proficiency. My name is Kate Hansford and I work as an exam support manager in Cambridge Assessment English. With me today is Chris Thorne. Chris is a teacher trainer and writer who supports educators from around the world through online courses and through his writing. In 2021, he's delivered teacher development programs in Japan, Rwanda, and is currently working with Cambridge University Press and the British Council on digital materials for Turkey and Africa. While most of his time is currently spent behind a laptop in the UK, Chris has previously supported teachers and language learners while based in Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, and Morocco. So let's get started. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Kate, and welcome to everyone from all over the world. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's good to see so many of you here, and I'm glad to see you found the chat function as well. You're going to be using that a lot over the next hour or so. Okay, we've got so much to cover, so let's get straight into it. Today we're going to be looking at how we can use some ideas from the candidate information booklets to really support our learners on preparation courses. Now we're going to do that by looking at three main questions. We're going to ask what candidates need to know. Secondly, how these booklets can help. And thirdly, and this is the really meaty big question that I'd like us to focus mostly on, and that's how we can use these ideas in the classroom, how we can incorporate them within learning activities. Now, I'll be trying to suggest some ways that we can do that in a range of settings. So whether you're in a physical classroom or working in a more online environment, I'll try and suggest some ways that we can do that. But I'd also like you to think about how you can take and adapt these ideas for your learners. But don't keep this to yourself. Please share your ideas in the chat. I'd like for this to be as collaborative as possible, and if we can really try and share the good stuff around us. Okay, so let's get on to our first task. Our first task is thinking about what it is that candidates actually need to know. So you tell me, please, in the chat, what do you think learners or candidates need to know to be successful in exams? You might want to draw upon your own experience as an exam taker, or think of questions that you commonly get asked during preparation courses. From the poll at the beginning, it looks like the vast majority of us are currently working on exam preparation courses. So I can see lots of answers relating to the content of the exam, the structure of the exam, how many marks. Sorry, there's so many suggestions. I'm struggling to see names as well as the suggestions, but thank you. Yeah. Exam structure and task, time allowed, marking criteria, Maria, formats. Okay, Felipe, yes, thank you so much for your suggestions. I'd like to show you a few overarching questions that I've picked out of the booklets, and I think a lot of your suggestions fit into these. So, firstly, I think a lot of students will need to know, how can it help me? Now, this might not be a question that they openly ask or stick their hand up in sort of during a session and ask you directly, but it's a very important question that they're likely to have in mind. And the answer is really important because that's what will keep motivating them to sort of keep on plugging away throughout the course. So although you might not be asked, it's an important one for them and an important one for us as teachers to consider. Okay, the next question. Here we go. What happens on exam day? So maybe there's some more sort of practical considerations. Where they need to be, when, what should they bring? Do they need to bring pens or pencils? For which bits do they need those? That's all useful, practical stuff they need to know. Now, this third question, I think this covers the vast majority of your suggestions in the chat. So this is talking about exam knowledge and exam strategies. So what is the exam like and what's the best way of approaching it? So we're talking about maybe marking, how they're marked, what kind of questions you get, how they should be answered, and the overall structure. They'll need to know how to prepare for it, as well as knowing sort of useful strategies for approaching the exam. Obviously, the exam is assessing their ability to understand and to use language. So developing that language knowledge and language skills is another really important part of exam preparation. Finally, they'll need to know what happens next. In terms of the exam process, they'll need to know how to get their results as quickly as possible and how to understand them. They might also need to think about their next steps sort of in their journey after the exam and the doors that the exam might open up for them. So although that's perhaps one of the final things you might naturally think about, it kind of links back to the very first question and thinking about how it can help me, which is really tied to motivation. Okay, now today we're focusing very much on B2 first, B2 first for schools, C1 advanced and C2 proficiency exams and what candidates needs to know for those. So just to go over those questions again, or to summarize those questions that we just looked at, they need to know the benefits of the exams, how they can help the students. They'll need some exam knowledge, so how is it structured? That will help them know how to best approach it and to prepare for answering them in the best possible way. They'll need to know the exam day procedure. They'll need to be in the right place at the right time and feel nice and settled and confident when they sit down in their chair, and having an understanding of exam day procedure enables that. And again, they will need to know what happens next. Now, the chap we can see on our screen is just taking his first steps on his journey from B2 first to C2 proficiency level. That's obviously that's quite a journey. There's a couple of steps there, but I'd now like to try and focus in on just one of those levels and how we can help students prepare for those. So, as we've seen, they'll need to know the benefits of the exam. They'll need to have exam knowledge, preparation. They'll need to know the procedure, what next, all of that. So we know what they need to know, but we also need to consider when they need to know it. So it's not helpful to provide all this information at once. They won't be able to remember it all, and that won't be a good use of anybody's time. So it's helpful if you can introduce information gradually, and if candidates have repeated opportunities to take that, to use it and to work with it, so multiple times, in order to sort of make it a part of what they do when they approach exam tasks. To help you sort of prioritize and maybe organize the exam content that you're going to share with learners, it's helpful to think of when they'll need it. So consider, will they need it when preparing for the exam? So that's very much before. Will they need it on the exam day itself? Will they need it when taking the exam? Or will they need it more for after the exam? So that can be a useful way of looking at what you might want to share and thinking about when it would be useful to do that. Now, as I'd say with any part of teaching, it's really useful to have a plan of when you're going to do stuff. But having said that, it's essential to keep your ears open and to remain responsive to your learners' questions and to their needs. So if someone has a particular question, if they really feel they'd like to know something in particular, it's helpful if they can get an answer to that question as soon as possible. That's one of the benefits of the candidate information booklets. As well as it being something that you can incorporate within learning activities and be used sort of within collaborative work that you might do with learners, it can also support independent study and so kind of function as sort of a reference guide for individual learners as well. But anyway, there's me talking all about the booklets and you haven't even had a look at one. So let's put that right and show you some of these booklets. So today we're going to look at 4 in particular. We're going to look at the B2 first, B2 first for schools, the C1 advanced and the C2 proficiency ones. You can see them on your screen now. Now the contents for each of these is very, very, very similar. Or at least the way they are organized are really similar. That's because kind of regardless of the learner's level, they need to know the same essential things about their exam. It's just the actual details that might differ between levels and individual papers. And that's what we're going to be looking at over the next 45 minutes or so, and how we can help learners with their individual exams get their heads around what's involved and really sort of internalize some of the things that they need to be able to do on exam day beforehand. Now, as I walk you through these booklets, as we go, I'd really like you to sort of reflect and think about how you could apply some of this with your learners. So as we look at individual content, think about why it could be helpful for them, how they could use it. Think about when they might need to use it in their learning journey. And I've just seen a question from somewhere in the chat there. Sorry, again. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's Mildred Angelina who says, why can't the preparations begin right from the initial stage of learning? And I think they can. I think we very much can start making links between what we're teaching and how it's useful in the real world, and how we can sort of develop those skills and how they might be linked into exams right from the beginning. There should be a line going straight through all of those things. Anyway, sorry, that's a little tangent. So getting back to what we're going to be looking at next, as well as thinking about why content could be useful and when they might need it, I'd like you to really think about how they could usefully engage with it. And this is what I was speaking a bit about at the beginning. So I'd like you to think about how you could work with the content we're about to look at, how you could adapt it for your learners. Now, of course, these are booklets. And as I said, you could give these to learners and allow them to look through them individually as independent reading. However, I think a lot of the value in them is using them as a learning resource, and that could be using them as a stimulus for sort of classroom activities where learners bring their own knowledge and their own experience into activities. And I'd really like to hear from you and hear about how you could do that with these activities. As you share your ideas, I'm going to try and chip in a few as well. Just to help you keep in mind those 3 points, I've got that little checklist there in the top corner of the screen, and we'll keep that up there as we go through the booklets. So these are the first few pages of the C2 Proficiency booklet. Learners will be dipping into these as they go throughout their preparation course. So you might find the how to use this guide section helpful at the beginning, so they can orientate themselves within it and they know what they can find and where. This little section in the middle called About the Exam is, unsurprisingly, that is about the exam. That contains some information about how it is structured. It's an overview of the 4 papers, what they assess, how they are weighted. So that answers, I think, some of the questions that people were asking right at the beginning. That will help learners perhaps think about where they need to focus some of their preparations. Now, the final section here, preparing for the exam, is, shockingly, not shockingly from the title, that's very, very practical, and as well is full of suggestions about how learners can prepare. It's got lots of nice practical suggestions, sort of general study tips that might be particularly helpful at the start of a course when creating a study plan. Now, we're going to return to that little section later in this session, but I'd really like you to get your thinking caps on and think about how could you get your learners maybe thinking and sharing some of their useful study strategies. Is that something that you do in your class at the moment? And how do you get learners to sort of share ideas and benefit from each other's experience? We'll be coming back to that later, so please do keep those ideas in mind. Okay, then next, the booklets are all then split up into the 4 sections. Each one relates to a different paper. So reading and use of English, writing, listening, and speaking. This is an example of the first one. This is taken from the B2 first level booklet. It starts with a breakdown of the actual paper. It gives a description of the individual tasks, what candidates have to do, and the time they have to complete it. It also provides some useful information about the paper, as well as links to extra resources that teachers and learners can use to practice and develop an understanding of exam knowledge and language skills. So if you would like to get your hands on some sample tests and some self-study lesson plans to share with your learners, then that is a good place to go. Now here there's some more study tips. The ones we spoke about before were more general. These are very much focused on reading and the development of vocabulary, so looking at collocations, phrasal verbs, things like that. If we go over the page, you'll see these two sections. So on the left, there are lots of common questions about the paper, which are then answered by somebody else who has some answers. So common questions with some answers. I wonder how you could use these in the class. Could you use this as the basis of a communicative activity? Could you use it as a prompt to get learners thinking about their questions? I don't know. Have a think. We'll be sharing our ideas very shortly. Okay, and then over leaf, we've got a list of do's and don'ts. Now, these do's and don'ts relate very much to the paper 1, reading and use of English. You'll see that key information is highlighted. So again, I'd really like you to think about how you could use a resource like this in your preparation classes. Maybe you already do. If you do, what do you do with it? Do you just get students to read that page sort of passively? Or do you give them some extra tasks, or do you adapt it to make them engage with it a little bit more, or sort of personalize it and relate it to their own practice? Okay, I can see lots of suggestions already coming in. Yeah, Kate's suggesting that you could use it as a warmer to get students to sort of meet another partner. Michael suggests using this as the basis of a quiz. Ruth is saying you could gap fill with do's and don'ts. God, lots of good ideas there. Look, keep your thinking caps on. We'll be coming back to this very shortly. Okay. Now this is the B2 First for Schools booklets on paper 2. So it's a different exam and a different paper, but it looks very, very similar, doesn't it, to the last one? It still provides an overview of a paper. It still shows the number of parts. It explains what candidates needs to do. It says how much time they have. It gives lots of useful information, links to further resources, and it has some study tips, but these ones are focused on developing writing skills. So again, it's got much of the same kind of information. It's just the details that are different. Again, if we look over the page, that looks familiar, doesn't it? We've got common questions and answers and do's and don'ts. This is the C1 Advanced Booklets section on paper 3, listening. Exactly the same stuff. Different details, obviously, but it's got the same structure. And the same over leaf. And then when we go to the paper 4 for speaking, this one is from the C2 Proficiency booklet. And again, the same structure, because regardless of the level, learners need to know the same kind of stuff. They have the same fundamental questions that need answering. And that's what it's really useful for us to bear in mind as teachers. We go over leaf, obviously exactly the same stuff there. We've got this common questions and answers followed by do's and don'ts. Now, having the same structure across all of the papers and levels allows you and your learners to easily anticipate what's there. It helps you find what you need quickly, and it's reassuring for learners as they progress from one level to the next. Okay, now, that's all stuff that's very useful for preparation, thinking about exam knowledge, and strategies, which they'll need to work on before. The next section looks at some stuff that will be really useful, but on the day. Although I would strongly recommend working with this beforehand. So there's a video, or there's a link to a video at the top, which shows the candidate on her actual exam day. That helps learners get a feel for what to expect. Again, just like any part of this, a video is a text. And yes, you can just put it on and get people to watch it passively. But I think it probably has way more value. There's much more we can do with it. There's much more we can do with it when we incorporate it within within an activity. We could perhaps use it as the basis of a classroom listening activity. Maybe students would share what they know about exam day, what they think is going to happen, how they feel about it themselves, perhaps. And then you could watch this, you could use it as a resource to fill in some of the gaps. There's lots you could do with it. I'm sure we'll see some more suggestions in the chat. I can see Human saying listening in a booklet. Yeah, Human, that's a link to a video. So you open it, it opens up in YouTube, and you've got a video there of someone walking through and talking the viewers through her experience of exam day. You'll also see all this information about what people need to do before exam day. So like finding an actual test centre, planning how they're going to get there, etc. People need to register for the results service, or it's certainly a good idea if they want to get their results as soon as possible, and it's best if they do that way in advance of the exam. There's also lots of answers to common exam day questions. Over the page, we've got some more tips for exam day. Now, a lot of the tips we've seen before are really focused on how to answer questions, what they're asking, the things we need to bear in mind. It's very much to do with sort of maybe preparing knowledge and skills. These exam day ones make some really nice practical suggestions, like it's important that learners are rested, that they feel as good as they possibly can, that they feel confident when they sit down in their chair ready to go on exam day. And for that to be possible, it's helpful if they're rested, maybe if they've thought about what they're going to eat on that day and they've planned it all, rather than not considering it at all, and not being in the best shape when they come to do it. As well as those tips, there's some important suggestions about things they should do as well as not do on exam day. Finally, there's everything they need to know after the exam. So, how soon will they get their results? That differs according to how they take the exam. Is it computer-based? Do they take the paper-based exam? It helps them understand their results. It gives some more information about what their scores might mean, and some answers to some very important questions, like how can employers or maybe universities verify results? It provides some suggestions about what candidates might be able to do next to continue developing their language skills. So what could be the next step in their learning journey, and some of the doors that their new qualification might open up to them. Okay, so that is essentially the booklet. You've seen it cover to cover. But as I've mentioned before, I don't think the value in them is really giving them students to be read cover to cover. I don't think that's very, very helpful. I think it's much more useful if they're used as a learning resource, something that we will return to and dip into regularly throughout their preparation course. And now we're going to look at how we can incorporate them within learning activities. Okay, perhaps you remember this little section from the beginning of the booklet. It contains some study tips. So this one in particular has some suggestions about how to use practice tests effectively, how learners could record language, record vocabulary, and also how they could maybe find extra opportunities to practice. Now, yes, we could just give that to students to read, but no, I'd like to get your suggestions on how they could be incorporated within classroom activities, where learners would share what works for them and to create opportunities for them to learn from others. Okay, so my eyes are moving over to the chat. I can see Kanchan is talking about a group discussion. Oh, Sonia's talking about a vocabulary diary. Yeah, I think that's a really, really useful tool for vocabulary. I wonder if learners will already have vocabulary booklets or vocabulary diaries. If they do, would this activity, would this be a good time to ask them to get them out, maybe show each other how they already record vocabulary, and then perhaps they can sort of get some good ideas from each other. Perhaps some people use word clouds. Maybe they organize vocabulary by topic. What kind of information do they tend to include? Do they make a note of collocation? Do they include example sentences? So these are all things they might be able to pinch from each other. Okay. Well, Kate again is suggesting making predictions with a partner and checking them against the information. I think that's a lovely idea. So you're making use of all of the ideas in the booklet, but you're not using that as the limit to the ideas that learners are working with in the classroom. You're using it to guide them, but not limit. You're using it as well as a prompt to bring in all the knowledge and expertise and experience from all the other people in the classroom, especially with higher level learners. You think if you're working with sort of B2, C1, C2 level learners, they will have done a lot of work to get to that level. They're probably quite successful language learners, so they'll already have lots of learning strategies that work for them, but they probably don't all have the same ones. If you can create a space where they can share them between each other, that's really, really, really helpful. So some ways that you could do that are to, as we've already spoken about, show and tell. You can ask students to think about a few things that work for them, and then share them with other people. Now, the way you share them, there's a few different ways of doing that. You could do it physically. So for example, if you record vocabulary in a vocabulary book, then you could maybe sit around in your physical classroom and actually show that to other people, and use that as a prompt for discussion. People could take turns doing mini presentations, maybe to other members of their group, and then mixing up the groups, so then all the ideas are shared between all of those people. I'm not a big fan of people taking turns to do presentations to the whole class. The reason for that is that very often you just end up with one person speaking at length with lots and lots of people passively engaged. That might work well during webinars. Well, I hope so. But during sort of language classes where we want to get as many people interacting and producing language at the same time, it's better to do it in pairs and groups. Now, a lot of you will also be teaching online. You won't be in physical classrooms, or social distancing might mean that it's important that your learners keep their distance. If that's true for you and your learners, or even if it isn't, another really nice way of sharing information or presenting the ways that they do things could be using a collaborative online space, something like a Padlet, or maybe a Flipgrid. I think even a Google Jamboard could be used for this in a way. There's various different platforms, but you could ask your students to go away, think about their study skills that work for them, or their strategies, and then to share them in this collaborative space that can be accessed by everyone. An advantage of doing it that way is that you're not limited by class time. By not limiting it by class time, it means that you get longer and more developed contributions from each student. And also each student will have more opportunities to really listen to and take in each suggestion. They'll also be able to return to this resource, and it's something that people can add to over time as you go through your course. So you could do a show and tell. Another way of doing a similar thing, but making it problem-led, is getting learners to think of something that they struggle with, and then surveying their classmates about how they overcome that thing. So perhaps if somebody has a problem with listening and following longer stretches of speech, then they might survey classmates and ask how they improve in that area. So it's still connecting students, solutions, but this way it's a bit more problem-led rather than solution-led. Alternatively, you as the teacher could allocate specific areas of study to specific learners for them to research and then to report back to the rest of the group on. Now, a benefit of this is that you can then ensure that each little mini sort of presentation, or each person who's coming back and sharing ideas, will be sharing something that's different, and you won't have 20 people sharing their very similar vocabulary books. Now, all of these are useful ideas, and they're great ways of exposing learners to useful ways of studying. However, they're not that much use if people don't actually act upon them, if they don't incorporate them within their own practice. So study plans are really helpful. Get learners to commit to note when they're going to use some of these ideas. Don't just make that a one-time activity that isn't returned to. In future lessons, find a little bit of time for learners to go back to their study plans and discuss with a partner. Have they been keeping to it? What have they been doing? What's been working well for them? What has been a bit more difficult? That can really help refocus individual learners and remind them to do it. And it also gives them a few more opportunities to get suggestions from other learners on an ongoing basis. Okay. Oh, and Rasha, you ask, is this webinar going on now? Yes, it is. Okay. So this is another feature you'll recognize from the booklets. These are common questions and answers. This one's from the B2 first booklet. So you've got people asking questions, other people giving answers. They relate to a specific part of the exam, a specific paper. So my next question for you is how could we get learners to actively engage with this resource in class? So ideas in the chats, please. Okay, so Phil Pereira, apologies for my terrible pronunciation, suggests using it as a basis for quizzing each other. So maybe having a sort of Q&A role play, acting. Okay, brainstorming. Oh, Paul suggests making this a matching activity. Okay, and I guess a matching activity that could be done individually. Maybe if you support individual learners, you could print this off and you could chop it up and get them to try and match questions with answers. Yeah, that could work. Maybe if you were doing it in an online context, you could turn it into a Kahoot. You could have a question and then make learners choose the correct answer from a selection of the answers on the right. Okay, lots of good stuff there. Okay, oh, Coots are the best. Says, oh, your name's disappeared. But yes, there seems to be lots of love in the comments for Kahoots. And this is certainly something that you could use with Kahoots. So just to draw on a few of your ideas there. I think a lot of people have mentioned prediction. And yes, I think you could maybe chop up the questions and answers. You could give the questions out, make people predict what the answers are before reading to check. Equally, you could chop up the questions and answers. You could give questions to some people, answers to others, and get people to mingle, walk around and find the person with the corresponding answer or question. So that could be quite energizing. It would get people out of their seats. Obviously, that's not going to work in a sort of online or a socially distanced classroom. We spoke about individual matching. You could get people just sort of with cut up cards trying to match questions to answers. Delma suggests bingo. That sounds like a great idea. I'm trying to picture how that could work in my mind. Delma, if you could give us a bit more information in the chat, that would be wonderful. Another thing you can do is a quiz. And a few people have mentioned using it as some kind of quiz. So I guess if learners if they've already got some knowledge about the exam, you could ask them the questions, have them working in groups or in pairs. By having them working in groups and pairs, they will be prompted to justify their answers, which kind of reinforces learning. It creates more opportunities for them to learn from each other. And that might also help inform the teacher about what they already find easy, what they find difficult, and whether there's any gaps in their understanding. However, while it's fun, a quiz like that is still a bit of a test. And a test is useful if maybe they've got some of that information already, but it's not so helpful if they are really, really new to their test and they just don't know anything yet. So if you're right at the beginning of a preparation course. If that's the case, you could make it more of a treasure hunt. So you could give the questions, but maybe allow them to look at the booklets, look at other online resources to find the answers. So you could make it more of a treasure hunt activity. Okay. So, oh, sorry, final question about questions. And this is something, sorry, I forget your name. This was mentioned right at the beginning. You could use these questions as a prompt for their own questions. So sometimes after an activity, someone might ask you, do you have any questions? And you'll say, no, I don't have any questions. But then you hear a few other questions from other people, and it gets your own mind sort of going. And you're like, oh, now you mention it. Now I'm wondering about this and that. And how about pens? Can we use pens? Do we have to use paper, pencils for this question? So it can be a prompt for learners' own questions. Okay. And then we've got do's and don'ts. So this one is from the speaking section of the C2 proficiency booklets. They're already organised into do's and don'ts. They focus on key strategies and exam tips for that specific paper. I would love to hear your ideas about what we could do with this. How could we use these do's and don'ts lists within engaging, communicative classroom activities that get learners sharing their ideas, learning from other people, and connecting this input with their own sort of exam practice and experience. Okay, June suggests mixing them all up. So I guess you're printing this out and getting some scissors, chopping them all out and letting learners guess whether they are a do or a don't. Yep, that would work. You might need to retype or rephrase some of them because the don'ts all start with don'ts at the moment. That might be a bit of a giveaway, but I think that is a really good idea. True or false questions. Okay. You could put the tips on individual cards, get students to categorize them. You could get people to move around the classroom. It could be quite a physical activity, that, couldn't it? I think normally when we think about exam preparation, maybe we're left, so at least initially, with a sense of people sitting down and working individually and it being a very quite dry, maybe quite dull process. But it doesn't need to be that way. As you suggest, we could stick some of these on cards, give them to each student, and get them to move to an area of a classroom, depending on whether it's a do or a don't. It gets the blood flowing, gets people moving around a little bit, and is maybe a little bit easier to concentrate for the rest of the class afterwards. If you're working with learners online, you can't get them to move to different parts of your classroom, but if they have webcams, if your students have webcams, then you could show individual tips and you could get them to give signs. You could ask them to stand up if it's a do or put hands on heads for a don't. So you could get some kind of physical response and still get your learners showing their understanding. Okay, yeah, Nohalia suggests, more student talk time and less teacher or trainer talk time. Okay, Karen suggests limited time discussions. Okay, talking of time, I'm looking at the time and we've still got bits to cover. So let me show you some of my ideas. So you could ask students this at the beginning. So before you even look at the paper or at any of the tips, ask them, what tips do you think might be in here? So it's kind of a prediction activity. Nice and simple, a prediction activity. That will give you a good understanding of what learners already know and what they think they know, which might help you fill in some gaps and sort of prioritize your support in class. As someone suggested, you can give statements, you could read them out, you could show them on screen and let learners categorize them. Are they do's or are they don'ts? So tell me, do you think this is a do or a don't for speaking? Yeah, Sue, May, Diana, yep, that's clearly a do. This one, is this a do or a don't? Oh, who's going to be first to answer? Oh, okay, it's too much. Oh, I can't read that fast. Okay, but yeah, you could get people responding in by text. In an online class, you can get them typing in the chat box. You can get them to turn on their webcams. You could get them giving a physical response to show whether it's a do or a don't. You can do that in a physical classroom as well. You can get people to give a physical response. You can give them mini whiteboards or bits of paper where they have to write and hold up do or don't. You could take the same approach with kind of gap filling it. So you can make your own gap fill activity using some of those do or don't statements. Okay, so I can see people are already answering this. It's quite a natural thing, isn't it? You see a gap fill, you naturally want to complete the activity, and your learners will as well. So this is quite a good way of doing it. The answer, yes, is pauses or silences. Okay, and there's some more examples of gap fills you could do. Now, those are three very, very simple ways of adapting the activity. You have given another 20 ideas at least in the chat, so thank you very, very much for that. Now, I'd feel a little bit of a fraud if I invited all of you teachers here and I tried to palm you off with prediction and categorization and gap fill as some kind of really clever new approach to teaching, because I know you do this anyway. You do this all the time. It's useful to bear this in mind. We can use these kind of activities to raise learners' awareness of these do's and don'ts. So they do have a place, but it's not enough for learners to just be aware of what they should do and what they shouldn't do. They need to actually incorporate that within their own practice. So knowing it isn't enough. They need to be able to do it. And that's only going to come through practice. So those last activities help them recognize some of these helpful behaviors and strategies to use in exams. I'd recommend also demonstrating them. Just because you've spoken about them and they know what they're called, it doesn't mean they necessarily know what they are. Just because they know that they should do active listening, it doesn't mean they know exactly what active listening is. It's showing understanding, but it's an interactive two-way process sort of with the speaker. So it can be useful to use recordings and texts to give activities where learners analyze them and are focused on the key elements of these behaviors. So they really, really know what these things look like. When they do know what they look like, then they need to practice using them. Lots and lots and lots. Now, it's helpful if learners record themselves practicing. That probably feels really weird for them at first. It certainly did for me, but they get used to it really, really quickly. A huge benefit of recording themselves is that they can then self-evaluate. It provides some evidence. They can see and they can hear what they said and whether they made eye contact or nodded and looked at the other person and whether they used their name. So these do's and don'ts lists give a list of things that they should do or shouldn't do. And now this traffic light system can help learners self-manage, and it can help organize their self-evaluation. So after an activity, they should categorize and note down things that they didn't do that would be helpful for them to do, things they should start doing. They should note down good things that they did that they should keep doing. And they should note down things that they did that wasn't so helpful, maybe speaking over their partner, interrupting them, things that they should try and cut out of any future practice activities. That provides them with a personalized prompt of things that they should do next time they practice. Then the next time they practice, they have a quick look at their checklist and they know what they need to focus on. So that can help learners take more control of their learning. It helps them become more effective, independent learners who don't rely so much on their teacher for sort of ongoing feedback. Okay, so those are some things you can do with the booklets. And you know what the booklets look like. What you don't know, maybe, is where to find them. So let me show you where you can get your hands on these booklets. So first, go to cambridgeenglish.org. Oh my gosh, that's my Amazon thing, which is trying to get me directions to Cambridge. Okay, so first go to cambridgeenglish.org and then tap on exams and tests.
Head south on Eastford Street, then turn left onto Melbourne Street.
Go away. Okay, and then go to preparation. Choose your exam. Choose the level of exam you're doing. And then preparation, scroll down the page, and about halfway down you'll find this section here, information for candidates booklets. Tap on the link, that will download to your device and you are good to go. There's a section at the end which provides lots of information about the exam. If you do use this yourself, I'd recommend using the online version on screen because that means you can use all these navigation tools. Depending on the browser you use, then you may also be able to use text-to-speech functionality, meaning learners can hear as well as read sections of the booklet. So that's everything that I wanted to show you today and walk you through. I'm not sure if we have time for a few questions. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Chris. Thank you so much for a great webinar, and thank you to all our participants. We have had the best interaction in this webinar, so thank you, everybody. I've been trying to answer as many questions and answers as they've been coming in, but really had quite a few. So I think we'll, just to say, I think we've literally just got time to say the best place to start looking for any free resource for students and teachers is to go to our website. I did actually put a link in the chat, but here it is again. It's www.cambridgeenglish.org/teaching-resources-for-teachers. So that is the best place for you to start, and you can search for any handbooks, you can search for these information for candidates, and I'm just going to put that link in the chat again so that you've got it. And you, of course, will be sent the link to your certificate and the webinar recording and all of these slides, which Chris has presented next week when the webinar goes live on YouTube. So thank you, everybody, and thank you again to Chris, and have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. Bye, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.